F12 webcast. I'm your host, Devon Gillard, Chief Marketing Officer for F12.net. Today we're going to dive into the CIO function, a member of the C-suite that's missing from a lot of organizations. We want to explore what it is, what the function's value is, what organizations may or may not need it, and whether that's full-time or a fractional CIO, and really help explore whether a CIO can add competitive differentiation and extra value to your organization. To help us with this topic, I've brought on two experts that are with F12. They are vCIOs, and we'll explore a little bit about that term and what that service entails as we get into our discussion. Welcome our vCIO, Chris Pickard. Welcome to the webcast, Chris, and Brandon Peters. Chris, you're joining us from what we like to call the Eastern quadrant of F12, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with F12.
Yeah, I've been in IT for over a couple decades. Recently, with F12 for the past 2 years, I was added through an acquisition, which is kind of baked into our DNA. And in the last couple of years, essentially working with our account executives to help clients define their IT strategy.
Thanks very much, Chris. And Brandon Peters, we've worked together for a very, very long time.
Yes.
Tell our audience a little bit about your history with F12.
Very similar in terms of where I come from as far as Chris is concerned. It is an M&A play. I rolled into the company as part of an acquisition of Excel Professional Services back in 2016. So very much a company that's focused on M&A. And I have been working in the IT manager, space, account management, sort of throughout that whole space, and moving into a VCI role within the last few months here. Also been in the IT space going back to about 2007, 2008.
Well, you guys are long time in the IT space, and everybody in the IT space loves a movie, and that's Office Space. And you know, there's that scene where he kind of wanders up where they're kind of judging, what everyone does, and it says, what would you say you do here? So I'm going to turn that question to you, Chris, and just ask a CIO. Fundamentally, what does a CIO do? What is the role of a CIO? What does it even stand for? Help us with that. Acronyms abound.
Yeah, we'll start there. So CIO stands for Chief Information Officer, and is one of the roles that you would typically see in IT. I think the easiest way to think about of the C-suite that is most commonly looking inward to the organization.
Hey, Chris, I think we're having a little bit of connectivity issues with you right now. So I'll just let you have a chance to sort that out, and I'll go to Brandon. So save the day for us, Brandon. What is a CIO, and what does it mean?
Well, I think the interesting thing that we were going to talk about as a CIO is that they're not in the trenches. And here we've got our friend Chris, who's suddenly having to dive into his own trenches and work that out. So it doesn't mean that we can't do it, but we do try and work on overall business strategy, processes, people. We're the line of the business that wants to align IT with the business and not the other way around. We want to step in and work on figuring out what the business goals are, how IT can help achieve that, and in many cases give you a competitive business advantage as well. And so on that, I always like a different movie reference there. I always go back to Kindergarten Cop and reference who is your CEO and what does he do, or CIO and what does he do? But I'm not going to do the Arnold impersonation here.
Okay, you get extra points if you do the Arnold.
Yeah. No, we'll do a hard pass on that one.
All right. Well, maybe my first question, Chris, are we back now? I know Wi-Fi can be a little temperamental at times.
I hope so. It looks like it.
Okay, great.
I apologize.
So Brandon Peters just sort of gave us a broad outline of what a chief information officer is. I often, in my mind, get it confused with another role. What's different between a CIO and a CTO, a chief technology officer, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I think we see some of the overlap just inherent in what we do day to day with working with organizations. IT is a complex environment, and there's lots of moving pieces. Whereas a CIO would be more inward looking. A CTO would be more focused, looking outside of the business. So more on the technology stack, the vendor, the partners that the business is leveraging to help deliver their overall strategy, and essentially responsible for managing that technology on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. Well then, Brandon, I'm going to go another level in the organization for comparison. A lot of companies may not have anybody in the C-suite. They may not have a CTO or a CIO, but they have an IT manager that, broadly speaking, is responsible for a whole range of technology initiatives in the organization and the operational oversight of them. What, in your opinion, differentiates a CIO from an IT manager?
When we've worked with a lot of different IT managers, directors of IT, there's a lot of different names that get applied to these roles, and they tend to be straddling a bit more of a line between strategy and operations. They are typically more in the trenches. They're going to be responsible for taking the strategy that comes down from the C-suite, deploying that out to the business, making the improvements that come out of that direction, rather than necessarily being sitting at that same table, getting that direction, and being able to help determine that direction that the business is going to flow.
Okay, perfect. So it's often, I've been taught to think about business in terms of three major categories: the tactics, the operations, and the strategy. So, by virtue of being any C-suite, you're up in the strategy sphere, and not in the operation. I know most of the having fulfilled an IT manager function for organizations before. I know you two gentlemen have as well. You're so deep into the operations, and the urgent can often overwhelm the important, the things that can make a difference to a business. So how exciting is it that you can have a role whose job it is to manage strategy? And that might be kind of a lead to the question, Brandon. What organizations that don't have somebody thinking about their strategy with regard to information technology, what are they missing?
I think I'd be more afraid about what they don't know they're missing. They don't have that person who's doing the deeper discovery to find out where they could be heading within the industry, within the business, to take them up to that next level. I've worked with so many IT managers in the time that I've been with F12 that are responsible for preparing a report for their board of directors at the same time that they're managing an outage for a major system application. And I just have to ask, like, how thorough is that board report going to be? Because, I mean, you said it yourself, Devon, the urgent can often overpower the important. And if you're dealing with something like that, it's the definition of urgent. People are down, people aren't functioning. That gets your attention. That's what's calling out to you. And how much time are you spending on the security elements, the process improvements, and some of these other elements that are really integral to the businesses of today, to take them up to that next level and give them that competitive advantage.
I think it's great. Chris, invite you if there's other perspective you have on the different skills and experience that a CIO level individual brings as compared to the essential function of an IT manager.
Yeah, I think it really does, as you alluded to, differentiate what is between tactical, operational, and strategy. And that's, I think where I have seen some great opportunity and wins in my time with F12 is really, almost forcing clients to have that step back from the day-to-day, as Brandon suggested, and really to focus on the strategy. And I think it maybe shifts the conversation from what we're typically used to historically, wherein perhaps the strategy is being defined elsewhere, and then IT is left to just deliver something. And now we're almost front-ending that conversation where IT can be a voice at the table, helping define the strategy, understanding what the business objectives are, and then helping plan, with respect to how technology can help create that value and ultimately help deliver, whatever the goal may be.
Okay.
And I think it's important as well to reference the fact that having a role like an IT manager or VP of technology is still so critical to give the CIO that ability to step back and work at it from a strategic level. So it's important to have multi-faceted roles within your organization that can do a little bit of everything, but also specifically focus on the things that need to get done within their particular part of the business.
Okay, I think it's that's helpful to align it with other functions that we have in a business. So if I'm catching you right, Brandon Peters, it's important to understand that a CIO is not a replacement for an IT manager. It's another strategic asset. And I think it's pretty important to understand. No more than your CFO can replace your controller, your accountant manager, your bookkeeper. You have different functions in order to free up and provide the data so you can have a strategic conversation about your capital. And I think everyone can think about different roles. Your operations manager and your COO can't be the same thing. Maybe that's a better analogy, right? Between tactics and operations. That's really helpful. But we've talked a little bit about what it is. We've talked about, ethereal concepts like strategy and adding value and things like that. It'd be really helpful to anchor that with some examples. I invite you two gentlemen to share where you've seen as the CIO function add value, competitive advantage to an organization. Chris, is it okay if I start with you?
Sure.
Share with us some examples of where a CIO has been impactful for a company.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's a great talking point, because sometimes we get maybe caught up on the fact that things like server upgrades, et cetera, are strategic, when in essence they're not. I mean, they're more of an operational activity. They need to happen, and I think where I've seen some great success in the past year has been more with things like digital transformation, where we're looking at processes that historically were manual, perhaps paper-based, and where we can leverage technology, drive some automation, and digitize those processes so we can be more efficient in what we're doing at our clients. And I think the benefit there is twofold. Obviously, there is some impact to the customer in terms of the value that we're delivering to them, but we're also having a happier workforce. We have people that are more efficient at their jobs. The technology is supporting them. It's making their lives hopefully easier. And I think that's where we see some capabilities that the vCIO can bring to the table as we reflect on what the goal of vCIO is as it relates to kind of processes and supporting the business objectives.
I think that really also emphasizes the unique value of this position. I think, gentlemen, we'd all agree that it's more than a full-time job to keep on top of innovations just in information technology, between servers and firewalls and switches and security and et cetera. That's a full-time job right there. And then to have somebody focus on how that interfaces with the overall business strategy, the processes, the customer experience, the value creation of the business it's like a whole other area of the brain, and also requires attention and thought. At any rate, Brandon, I don't want to leave you out of here. Curious for you to share some of your experience or what you've witnessed in the value of the CIO position.
Yeah, and we do have a partnership with a group both Chris and I are working with quite closely, and they've shared some of their thoughts on the top priorities for CIOs in 2023 that are some things that people might not think about. It might be at the forefront of their imaginings today as things like ChatGPT, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all these businesses are moving into the realm of AI, but is your data ready to be consumed by AI? Is it at the point where it could be utilized to really give you a boost in efficiency? It's not something that you just feed it in and all of a sudden it starts, shooting out gold for you. It's got to be massaged. It's got to be a little bit cleaner than it might be in some cases. And taking that step in to find out not just, is it there? Is it available? But what's the quality of that data? Is it at the point where it needs to be in order to really drive the efficiency within the business? And in some cases, it's not. I would argue in many cases, it's not, because I think we're all secretly hoarders at heart for some reason, more so in the digital age than ever before in the physical age. I mean,
Because it costs more to delete it than to keep it. That's the
yes,
reality, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, there's so many peoples that talk about their policies, and they often forget about, okay, what do I like? I need to delete my data at some point, otherwise that's adding risk to the business as well.
Yeah, it's true.
And that's the piece where the vCIO can step in as well and add vCIO, CIO, whatever that position might be, and add that value to say, here's where we're going to be focusing. Here's what we need to do in order to meet these goals.
And I love that you brought up ChatGPT and AI, because I think it's a case in point where those of us who've been in the technology strategy space for a long time and have earned the gray hairs and the gray beard and all that sort of stuff know about the hype cycle.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share some observations about CEOs in a second. So hold on there, and I hope I don't offend anybody. But we know that things get hyped. AI 3 years ago they get hyped. Oh, it's amazing. And then there's what they call the trough of disillusionment, where everybody buys it and it's terrible. Like I'm yelling at my Google Home because it never understands what I want. But then there's like a path of productivity that comes afterward. And AI has now kind of gone through this cycle. And CIOs can help companies understand where an exciting technology is. Is it at the peak of inflated expectations? Is it at the trough? Or is it there? And now has come to my point that might be slightly insulting. It's been my experience that CEOs can often, I don't know if it's at the golf course or where it happens, here, we got to get AI. We got to do the cloud. We got to transform. And they feel like they get FOMO. They know there's something out there that'll be transformative. They want to be the Uber of, and a CIO can help them understand when it's wise to make that investment and how and what they need to ready themselves for. Just to put in what I heard you saying, Brandon, I think that's just really interesting observation.
Blame the airline magazines.
Sorry, help me out
for
with
driving
that.
a lot of those thoughts. It's just these 6-page magazines on the airplane that they get that is like, oh, we've got to sum up AI in 15 words or less. Let's make sure we grab their attention with something which may or may not actually be accurate. And I mean, to really drive home your case in point there, Devon, about this hype cycle, look at 3D when we're talking about things like movies. I mean, we can go back to a time when every TV you were going to buy was going to be 3D and it was going to come with glasses. And I would challenge anybody in the audience to advise us how often they use that feature, if they even own that anymore.
It's right there with the laser disc, the HD DVD player, guilty as charged.
Right.
Absolutely. And how can having a CIO help a company navigate these sorts of landmines of technology or fraught investments? How can it help a company have a competitive advantage, make themselves differentiated from their competitors in some way, shape, or form? Chris, do you mind delving into that?
Yeah, I think taking it back to just as you were discussing and talking about the catchphrases of cloud and AI, I think it's taking it back to really what the objectives of the organization are and what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and understanding that there will be a time and a place potentially for all types of technology, but with some input from vCIO, we can assess or at least help the business understand when is the right time to perhaps, tactfully do something or strategically do something from a technology perspective. What is ultimately going to serve the interests of the business the best? What's going to help achieve the goals of the organization? What's going to have a competitive advantage for you in your marketplace? What is going to perhaps drive some better experience for your internal users? But everything has to come back to what are the goals of the business, and how can technology support that?
Might even be a concept as simple as how can we process more transactions, which sounds simple, but really isn't. I mean, you want to get it to a point where maybe you're a customer service company, and you deal with all of your business by phone. Okay, well, I can add another person to that call queue, and that person can step in and maybe take as many calls as the person sitting next to them. But how can we take that to the next level? How can we get it to a point where we can do more calls? Do we need to introduce chat functions? Can we do it in a way that people are able to maybe have more than one conversation at a time, which I realize in some people's minds can sound like a route to poor customer service, but it functions very well in many cases, because the time to think out that response and type when you are working with a virtual agent takes time, and you could be more efficient that way, so people aren't waiting on hold and sitting in a queue, and all of a sudden you're able to process more, and people aren't waiting in a queue for an hour. Or my favorite one was the time where they told me I was 20th in queue, and then I was 19th in queue, and then I was 21 in queue, and I was just like, wow, that makes zero sense whatsoever. It's
other than
getting these
you weren't
processes in place.
important.
Yeah, exactly.
You weren't
exactly.
number one.
No. Don't think that call ever finished.
Wow, yeah, some of those calls, boy, I think we've all been in those rage moments. When I'm hearing you talk about bringing in technology transformation to a business, one thing that struck me, gentlemen, is you both started with the outcomes, and I think this is sort of the tell. It always makes me nervous when technology is being implemented for technology's sake. Like, well, we need this, as opposed to I think we all heard that over the last 15 years. Well, we need to go to the cloud. Yes, okay. For why? For what? Let's explore why, because there's that you may get to the same end, but you'll be informed about what you're expecting for your ROI or your benefit. Which brings me to another question. So I mean, every business wants to operate faster, wants to rationalize their technology spend, wants to have a competitive differentiation. That goes for not-for-profits, charities as well. They're trying to deliver services better, and to maximize the return on the investments, the dollars that they're putting in. That's universal. But not every organization has room for 7 or 8 C-suite members. And we had all this budget. Let's just get a CIO. So what sort of an organization needs a CIO? Brandon, maybe I'll start with you.
I think one of the things that people maybe get lost on when they're thinking about this is, I'm not big enough for a CIO. I don't have enough size. But we've seen startups that are less than 10 people have a CIO in their C-suite. We've seen businesses that are 10 people without that vCIO really asking requests that should be driven to that type of a position. I don't think that there's anything that's going to tell you just based on size alone. It's really going to come down to your complexity as a business, what you're trying to achieve, and where you want to go with that competitive advantage. If you're in the business of serving customers, and I think that's a pretty wide basis of businesses out there today, you're talking about, okay, well, how's this company that is next to me, how are they dealing with this? How can I get that step up? And if you're at a point where you don't know that answer, maybe that's where you need to start looking at a CIO or a fractional CIO of some sort to step in and provide some of that advice to you to take it to the next level. Technology can be supremely empowering. It doesn't have to just be a cost center any longer. Not that I necessarily believe it ever was, but
well, I guess if you don't use it, right? Like,
yes.
It can be, if it's not providing value. And I think there's a lot of organizations that would make the claim that technology is not providing value and sometimes being a hindrance. Chris, Brandon kind of talked about the functions that a CIO can fill and where it might be necessary. What sort of organization should consider it? Are there particular industries or verticals that really a CIO is more required than in others, to put it in an awkward way?
Yeah, I think I have the perspective of, certainly in the model that we're looking to deliver and integrate with our clients, and deliver vCIO services. I kind of take the perspective of, we have a certain depth and breadth of experience across various different client clients and markets, and even as an example, even teachers go and refresh their skills and knowledge and those types of things. They lean on other experts to help, build out their experience. And I kind of perceive the vCIO role as doing the same. So you already have qualified and intelligent people working with you, but perhaps you're looking for a different perspective. Perhaps you have this unique project that you're looking to deliver, and you want to bring in some outside expertise. Brandon kind of alluded to a relationship we have with, Infotech, where we can bring some industry research and other experts to the table. And really, I think our role is not to necessarily have the answer for all things, everything, but really to help ultimately achieve the business goal. And that might be involving other thought leaders that we have access to within F12 or within our networks or partnerships. And so I think, in a perfect world, everybody needs a vCIO. I think there's an opportunity here where businesses can kind of take a step back, maybe think outside of the box, and what's the harm in having some outside validation in terms of, perhaps where they see their business going and how they're leveraging technology to support the goals.
I loved everything you said, Chris. And it occurs to me too, to have somebody fill that role in an organization, one of the things they have to be is strong enough to, like every C-suite member, to speak truth to power, to tell the rest of the organization when that plan might be fraught or is being underinvested, or I think we all know the horror stories of ERP or CRM implementations that have done far more damage to an organization than good, and sometimes they get abandoned, sometimes they get pushed through. And maybe those are some examples, but I'll ask you two gentlemen, what are sort of Chris, you talked about projects. You may need a CIO to help with a project. So Chris and Brandon, either one, if you want to jump in, can you share some examples of initiatives or projects where it might make sense to the benefit for an organization to have a CIO?
I think if you're dealing with a business that's highly regulated, especially if they're moving forward to a new degree of, and pardon me, I am fighting something a little bit here today, but if you're dealing with a business that wants to move in, I mean, F12, we've talked about a lot about being SOC 2 certified. If you're dealing with anything in the defense space, your CMMC, there's other businesses, medical being one that comes to mind very obviously, that's accredited and reviewed on a regular basis. You're going to want to have somebody who knows what those things mean, what can you kind of get away with without necessarily having to take it to the nth degree. And I don't mean that in any kind of duplicitous way. I mean, it's like we have to be effective with the solution we're deploying. It can't be something along the lines of, I always think of it in security terms, because I think what most people know, you can't have Fort Knox level security to the point where nobody can actually work. It takes an hour to log into their computer. They have to go through and maybe I'm dating myself, but they're Maxwell Smart walking through the 30 different doors on his way to work. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be efficient. You're losing time, money, everything if you're going to that level. So you want to really have somebody who understands what you need, and not less and not more. You want to find that sweet spot and really get it in there. And there might be some cases where, I mean, Chris alluded to it about having that network. I mean, you're talking about CEOs, CFOs, other businesses that have their networks of like-minded individuals from other businesses, CIOs, CTOs for that matter, are going to need to have that as well. It's not something that it's just an opinion. Yeah, you know what? I think we're okay if we just have a 7-character password. No, I've talked to people in the industry. I've taken that in, and I'm going to tell you that we need to do this. This is why we need to do it, in order to meet certain requirements in the business, and kind of give that high level, that 10,000-foot view on what needs to be achieved without getting bogged down into the how.
You bring up a really good lens that your overall information technology strategy needs to align with your industry's requirements, compliance, what your customers are going to demand of you, and how you can help an organization navigate that sort of stuff. Chris, is there anything else you wanted to jump in on this topic?
Yeah, I would just add that I think sometimes we have a tendency to overthink when we may need to have someone like a vCIO, integrated with our organization. Maybe it's more for like larger projects. I'm replacing a key line of business application, or I have to go embark on this new digital strategy. But I think there is an opportunity wherein we can have conversations around maybe we're not replacing necessarily the technology, but we want to find how we can drive more value out of the existing technology, how we can better integrate it between the different components, how we can get more data out of more usable and helpful data out of the data that we have. So I think there's opportunities there too, where we're not necessarily just coming in and looking to be the hired gun, so to speak, when we're forklift replacing an application, but we already have some useful technology within our business. We just want to drive more value out of it and see how it can help us work towards the organizational goals.
Yeah, and
I
sometimes that's
picked
going to
on.
be.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Oh,
Brandon.
sorry, I was just going to expand on that. Sometimes that comes down to when to go custom versus when to go off the shelf. Like a lot of people think they need to sit in and really design net new, and hopefully Alex isn't listening to me as I'm talking about this, but where you really don't need to have something that perfectly fits your business. Maybe you can get something for less that has a lot of processes and workflows and things of that nature built into it already, that you don't have to spend that time and a cost to get that bespoke solution for you.
Or if you do need a bespoke solution, how do you qualify the vendors? How do you know? Because I think we all know, at least in our industry, it's pretty popular. People have started an app dev project and it's like an open wallet in a vacuum. It can be. And then you gentlemen are fortunate enough to know the firms that are really good at scoping and delivering according to what the business needs. Brandon, when you talked about that, it really made me think. You talked about how you might want to approach your application. It just made me think. I know I picked on CEOs, so I'm going to go to IT managers, a little closer to my heart. Is sometimes we get also enamored in the technology space with tech, and an IT manager, especially one that's, let's just say, a little earlier in their career, can get sold on a solution. Part of the reasons why you might work with a managed service provider like F12 is to have a reference architecture that's been tried and true. But the more and more you get into the app space, or the more and more you push the boundaries, the more you can run into science experiments where somebody's cobbling together something unique without thought about its legacy cost or its suitability or its serviceability and all this sort of stuff. And I know we've had to walk into those situations where business is being run on, duct tape and bubble gum, and it snapped and nobody knew that. So a CIO I think it can also help, whether that's on the application side or the infrastructure side, can help navigate that. Excellent. So, Chris, you were talking a little bit about, organizations can often benefit from having this strategic discussion, this exploration internally of their needs. But I kind of picked up that maybe not every organization needs this as a full-time role. So help me understand, when you'd need a fractional versus a full-time CIO.
Yeah, I think, certainly there's some organizations out there, larger enterprise, perhaps, as Brandon alluded to, more complex, smaller organizations where they, where technology is kind of the underpinning of what they do, and they probably already have a CIO. And, we could probably talk about how there's still value in engaging an organization like F12 to help, bring additional value to the business for perhaps key projects. But I think in the nature of the organizations that we deal with day to day, kind of small, medium business, mid-market, there's an opportunity here for a vCIO, which, as you state, fractional. It can be a point in time engagement. It can be an engagement that evolves over time. The needs of your business are going to change. The technology is going to change. So, we would fully anticipate how we engage with the organization is going to evolve as well. And so it fills a temporary need, perhaps, one that grows or evolves over a relationship, depending on, what are the next objectives that the business is looking to achieve as it relates to technology.
Excellent, Chris. Anything to add to that, Brandon?
Yeah, I think the one piece that I would factor into that as well, and this is something that's been at the core of F12 for, I would say since inception. I wasn't here, but it's really about the value that we can add to businesses where we don't necessarily want them to have to be worrying about the technology. And you can have that person that's in that spot. You no longer have to, as so often happens, have your CFO being the decision maker for the business as it pertains to technology. Because
not that we don't love CFOs.
100%.
They're often the
Love
decision
them.
makers for technology. You raise a good point, Brandon. But they're probably, I would argue, more plugged into all of the nuances of business finance than they are about, emerging and transformative technology. Fair point,
Yeah.
eh?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Excellent. So let's say some folks have been listening to this conversation, and a business leader would really like to explore further and understand how they can start a discussion about whether a vCIO could provide some value to their organization. How do they start that conversation?
I think from my perspective, it starts with a business discussion, very high level. Let's, do some discovery around, what their organization is attempting to accomplish. Quite often those individuals that we're engaging with are aware of challenges that the business is having. They understand or even help define, what the goals or strategy for the organization is. They can give some great context of perhaps where they've come from as well. And I think from that conversation, just organically, we find great avenues and opportunities for discussion around how we can potentially drive some value. And I think that's the key. We want to be valuable. We don't want to just be another talking head, so to speak. And I think having that ability to focus on the business and talk candidly about where the organization is and where they're going can just really help kickstart perhaps some opportunities that we can work together alongside of them.
So like all great relationships, it starts with the coffee is what it sounds like. It's a conversation. see what the challenges are, where we're going to go. Go ahead, Brandon.
Or maybe you have a situation where you do have like a single project coming up that would benefit from having a little bit more oversight from a technical level. Somebody who has the understanding, who's been through those steps before, not just from a financial or an operations or an HR perspective, but has been able to step back and take a look at everything and how they all slot together. Maybe that's where you step into it and have that conversation to bring somebody in as a limited engagement, not as any kind of a commitment for a year, but for the duration of that project, whatever it might be, to find out what that value is. And then give yourself that insight to say, there's value here. I could see this playing into other spots in the business, into other projects that we know are coming up, in order to help boost those and make them more successful.
Well, thank you very much. I want to invite anybody who's joined us live for this webcast to ask questions they may have. I just want to say, gentlemen, I can see so much value in having access to seasoned technology professionals such as yourselves that have kind of seen it all and can bring a perspective to an organization for that moment in time, perhaps when they need it, or on an ongoing fractional basis if they're one of those organizations that is growing up. I did have a question come in here. How does the vCIO stay up to date with the latest technology trends and advancements? It's a great question, right? Technology moves so fast. So, gentlemen, how do you stay up to date?
Well, yeah, I would say, we do training just like every other technical professional in IT. We're doing some of that this year, and I'm sure Brandon will agree. We've done it, throughout our careers. Websites, user groups that you're part of that you can consume differing opinions on technology, and then lastly, perhaps Brandon, maybe you can just talk a little bit about our partnership with Infotech, and maybe other thoughts that you have on that note.
Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be able to go online and Google something, but how do you know that what you're looking at is a trusted source? And we all have our go-tos, and we know certain domains, certain organizations that publish are great, but we've paired with a company called Infotech that not only looks into the vCIO and the CIO roles, but other research elements within the technology space for businesses to find out, what's the important trends for 2023 that I mentioned earlier on. What are the things that a CIO or somebody in the industry should focus on today, as well as other partnerships that we might make with like-minded individuals in the same space at the CIO, CTO level to really talk the technology piece and understand what's coming, attending the seminars that are available from some of our business partners, whether it's our friends at Microsoft, Apple, Google, whatever the case might be, getting up to speed on what they've got coming down the pipe.
So one of the advantages, I guess, is that if somebody were to engage vCIO services from F12, they're also getting the collective research and knowledge of the Infotech research group. That's, spans industry, spans knowledge. That's important value add to have. Another question came in here is, how often will a vCIO provide updates and reports on their progress and recommendations? So I think somebody's here is envisioning that they're now working with a vCIO. What does that reporting and update look like?
I think it depends on the engagement. Yeah. Sorry, Brandon. Go ahead.
Well, we're aligned. That's what I want to see. I think that's the best thing that we could say. No, please go ahead, Chris, because I know you've been leading a lot of those conversations with the group longer than I have.
Yeah, I think it depends on the engagement. I think what we seek to identify is really what are the expectations, what are the needs from a vCIO perspective. Is that monthly reporting? Is it quarterly updates to leadership? Are we attending or participating in board meetings? From a technology perspective. So really, it can be whatever the business needs. Perhaps some of that does cross the border into more operational reporting, but I think ultimately, lends itself to just making sure the technology is helping achieve the business objectives.
So I'm understanding then is you can customize, like you'll work with them on the statement of work of what they need for the given initiative or engagement, as the case may be. All right.
And I think that helps to drop in a piece that maybe we've neglected and haven't talked about as thoroughly and has traditionally been one of the biggest parts of the CIO role, which is technology budgeting. So I would say at minimum, you're going to expect to be working with somebody in that capacity once a year. Now, mind you, we're not going to just sit down and pull that out of the air and say, here's, based on the 0 conversations we've had, this is where we're going to take you. There's going to be other elements that go into that and really drive what that budget and that strategy is going to look like. So I'd say, depending on what you want to do and what you're hoping to achieve, at minimum, probably twice a year, and more than likely you're going to be seeing something quarterly.
And we know, like, it's really interesting when you get to know businesses or organizations, not-for-profits. It's like from the outside they look like one entity, but when you get in, there's a lot, like there's complexity, there's relationships, there's trade-offs going on. So I thought this next question here really touches on that. So technology changes quickly. Everyone knows that. And not all stakeholders, the folks in the organization, understand its value. So sometimes it's difficult to get buy-in on a decision. So I think we've all experienced this. So it's really important to this department that this thing happens, but it has a knock-on effect to everybody else. And so everyone else doesn't necessarily like this new initiative. That's just not technology. That can be, I don't know, a new expense form. It could be anything, right? So how does a CIO help get that buy-in or work with other stakeholders to achieve consensus and make the necessary changes?
I think you're at a level where you're talking about somebody who can not only talk about the technology, but also provide the business cases behind it, and really look at it, again, that 10,000 foot view to say, hey, here's where this is going to come in out of this department, but you know what? It's also going to plug in over here. This may cause benefits. This may cause efficiencies. Maybe it's going to be the reverse. Maybe we are going to be that person that steps in and says, I don't know if this is the right move, and really getting into the weeds with the people who are trying to push that type of an initiative in order to stay on top of it. And I got to go back to a point we made earlier around not all new technology is the right technology. You're not going to just embrace it because it exists. You don't want to just be on the coolest new trend, emphasis on the word trend, if it's going to disappear for the world in a year. You want to be on something that's going to make sense, that you know is going to stick around, that has, either one, it's going to provide you some competitive advantage because of how early it is, that you're ahead of your competitors, that you do that, but you're still going to need to vet it. Or two, somebody who can step in and say, yeah, I've worked with this technology before, or I have a business partnership, they've worked with this before, I trust them. This is what it did for them. Providing that business case, providing some of those metrics to people to say, this is what it can do if done right. But we do have to do it right.
What a powerful concept you're talking about, Brandon, because it can be so, I've experienced that in our own organization. It can be so helpful to have an outside neutral party help elucidate the concerns, help uncover the challenges and the opportunities, and achieve consensus. And somehow it's a little easier than when the individual whose agenda it is in that department to get it done, to push it forward. It's just, and also sometimes that person's looking at it through rose-colored glasses. So it kind of works both ways when you have a neutral party that doesn't have a stake at all in what this is going to do, other than to help the organization be better, right? There's no departmental stake, I mean. Really interesting. We are running up against the clock here, gentlemen. So I want to thank you very much for participating in this conversation, and encourage anyone who wants to explore vCIO services with F12, have a conversation with Brandon or Chris, to go ahead and email sales@f12.net, and we'll be sure to set up a complimentary consultation. You can begin your conversation and see whether this could have some unique value for your organization. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.